Ernesto, what you felt that, what is it that people respond to the most about your work?
It's interesting. They respond a lot to the energy of the work, and it really taps something, it really awakens something in them. I've had people come in and all of a sudden they break into tears. And they start telling me things about themselves just because something they saw in an art piece really moved them and evoked something deep within them. And that sense of energy that people feel in the work is real important. I worked for years as a performer. I worked as a mask dancer and as a mime. So I wasn't really using words, and I was finding ways to communicate to the audience, and I was finding ways to let them have an emotional involvement with what I was doing on stage. And when I shifted into the visual arts, I wanted to see if I could do that same thing. Could I create pieces that are static in form, but have a presence in life that will touch and move people? And that pretty much is my goal, and that is what seems to move people the most. So the piece might be static or solid, but what they see moves them within. And that's really great. Like the spirit houses, you know, I've traveled a lot. I lived in a lot of different countries, and I've seen a lot of interactions with spirit houses or temples or altars, and their whole life, the whole vibrancy of their life, isn't just because they're beautiful, just because they're there, but because of the energy people put into them. And that really gives them life. And so for 100 years, thousands of years, I lived in Japan, I'd be in a temple that was 1,000 years old. It was just powerful, the way the pieces would resonate, the presence of the energy. And it's kind of the, as an artist, it's the greatest goal, I feel, is to kind of try to capture that energy, that elusive quality of spirit, and have it resonate through an art piece. So when people really respond to my work, pretty much that's what they're responding to. They like the beauty, absolutely. They're moved by the beauty, and they're moved by the, I would say, uniqueness. They often say they don't see this kind of work that often. But ultimately, I think they like the heart of the piece the most.
Yeah, your work is really unique to me. I don't know anyone who's doing anything remotely like what you're doing. At least certainly not locally, but it reminds me of it reminds me of other cultures. And when you talked to me before about having lived in other places, I could totally see that, because you've taken all these things and combined them and made your own voice out of it. So that what you just said kind of goes in to another question that I had, and that was, what is it that you want to communicate with your work to the world and to future generations?
Well, being an artist in this day and age is never, being an artist in any day and age is never an easy path. It's something, it's passion-based, it's based on internal fires that just rage up and take over and say, this is the way to go. And you just have no choice, basically. If you deny that, you kind of live in misery your whole life. So once you accept the fact that this is your path and you embrace it, pretty much there's no looking back, and they're just looking forward. So when you think about what do you want to leave for future generations or other people to see, I think the same thing you want people to, in the future, the same thing you want people to see and feel now. Is the power of the work, the presence and truth of it, the purity of it, which is very important, and the truthfulness of it. In this, when I say truthfulness, I mean in this day and age, and also throughout time. The work can resonate and hold its own throughout time. It's not bound by culture in this moment. It's
right.
Definitely not influenced by art themes or art modalities of this particular era that we live in. It just kind of connects throughout time. So I'd say if you visit a temple that's 1,000-year-old, hopefully you'll see a piece of mine 1,000 years from now and have the same feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
Do you have any what do I want to say? Do you have anything that you would say to other artists as like advice for aspiring artists?
You know, there's really no advice I can give, because actually if anyone's really bit by this artistic bug, they're going to go for it no matter what I say or do not say. And that's true for them, and that's true, you know, so there's no advice I have for anybody. I would say that if you're sitting on the fence, don't do it, because it's not definitely for the weak-hearted. No,
it's not. And I don't know about your experience, but I know with my experience with my art path, I sort of went back and forth with a few different things. And at one point I got to where I had made enough of a commitment that I had this realization that I couldn't go back. And it wasn't until I made that commitment that I became aware of that, and it was a pretty profound feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add is that, you know, people like, what's the difficulty about speaking about this kind of work? Is there a difficulty about speaking about this kind of work? And I would say, since this work is based on energy, there is a difficulty about talking about it. It's a little opaque for people, because in our culture we don't really talk about energy that much. We're really not aware of it that much. I'm Mexican by birth. I've spent a lot of time working in Latin America, a lot of time working in Asia, and both of those countries, they really grasp the mysterious presence of life. They kind of embrace it, and they don't have any deep, you know, really, I don't mean deep, but they don't question it when they see it in artistic form. This particular U.S. North American culture has more of a difficulty with it. So when you try to talk about it, you start talking about sacred, or you start talking about spirit or the spiritual, and immediately people drop into a religious, you're speaking religion. But I'm not really talking about religion. I'm not really religious-based, but I'm spirit-based. So there is that sometimes difficulty. But I just want to mention that.
I think people are getting a little more attuned to that, but there still is a lot of that, you know, putting up a wall against that idea, or not understanding it.
Right. You know, I've worked with masks for years, and I've discovered that people have a blockage to masks. And so I started calling them spirit faces, just to get around it. I started making altars, and I discovered that people have a blockage to altars. So I started calling them spirit houses, so they could suddenly not just as soon hear this word and put up their barriers, but hear spirit house, I could talk about the essence with them, and they could sort of embrace it and see the presence of it. So it's interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And there was one other thing that I wanted to ask, and that was, what is your biggest challenge, either with your work or your art business, or whatever you want to talk about in that vein?
That's a good question. I think the biggest challenge is what I was just talking about, you know, communicating the essence of this work with words. I don't think the English language has the words to hold what we are doing, what I'm doing. You know, as I mentioned, like probably Native American cultures, they have it. Asian cultures, they understand this kind of work. So there are phrases. And when I was in Japan, I was doing a dance. And the Japanese came up to me afterwards and said, that was really beautiful. And what you do is really well is you move between the spaces of movement. And that to me is a very Asian kind of thing. And I just loved it. You move between the spaces of movement. And that, I mean, what does that mean really? But it's the essence of movement. It's the essence of moving within the quiet spaces. You know, having that movement within quiet spaces. And it's that kind of phrase that kind of shows that here in the Western culture or North American culture, we really don't have an appreciation or understanding of that kind of movement, or know how to embrace it in a kind of in a way that's just mysterious, and not try to not try to analyze it too much and or intellectualize it too much.
Yeah, the closest that I think comes to what you're talking about that I can think of is poetry and cadences and how things fit together in a movement sort of way. And I don't think, well, I think people are more aware of that in movement, but I think your work, you know, even your sculptural pieces have that to it, even though they're not moving. You know, it's part of the whole energy and spirit that you bring to the work.
You know, it's like the art in making masks is not so much making the mask. The art is capturing the spirit and character of the mask.
Yeah.
And that's something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make the most beautiful mask, but if it has no spirit or character, the mask will be basically dead, have no life.
Well, your work has a lot of life.
Thanks.
And visiting your studio is always a treat. And I love to see all the new things you're doing. And I guess we're going to wrap this up.
Okay.
And thank you so much for sharing with us today and
Thanks.
letting us come visit.
Thanks for coming in.
And happy art making.
Thanks.